Of course. After like 18 months of being in pandemic, I don't know how to use the mute button, everyone. I'm so sorry. Hi, everyone. My name is Clay Pruitt. I am the head of acquisitions and programming at Seed&Spark. My pronouns are he, him. And I would love to welcome you all today to our Lunch and Learn about building an inclusive set for your cast. I have a few housekeeping things to go through before we get started. So first, we'd like to acknowledge the land that we are all on is occupied territory. I am moderating this Lunch and Learn from Pueblo and Ute land. Please check the YouTube live comments feed or the video description for a link to a First Nations COVID Relief Fund and an amazing app that will tell you exactly whose land you are currently watching from. If you're not familiar with Seed&Spark, we are a platform built to support creators by providing tools for wherever you are in your journey, from crowdfunding and education to creative distribution approaches. And I believe we're throwing a link in the chat for the Native Lands app, which is will be helpful for understanding whose land you are watching from. So this is the first event in Seed&Spark's new series, which is the Ethical Set series, which is a lineup of virtual events presented with the purpose of forging inclusive, ethical, and environmentally conscious creative spaces through dialogue centering education, information, and empathy, with topics covering inclusion writers, disability representation, impact distribution, and more. The Ethical Set series is not to be missed, so congratulations on being here for the first one. This will be an ongoing event series, so be sure to keep up with Seed&Spark's calendar on seedandspark.com/events, as well as follow us on social media to be the first to RSVP for future events in the series. And then, of course, this event is made possible by the support of WeTransfer. Having made its name in the game of quick and simple file sharing, WeTransfer has grown into an end-to-end suite of digital solutions with more than 70 million monthly active users in 190 countries. WeTransfer's set of tools are specifically designed to enable creative professionals to inspire, conceive, share, and deliver their work. So we're very thankful to have their support. Okay, so now on to the fun part and the actual meat of this event. I would love to bring up my two panelists for today. We are so thankful to be joined today by Nike Imoru, who is a British-Nigerian casting director, producer, actress of the stage and screen, and actors coach. She is the president and co-founder of Rebel Cat Productions, a female-led film finance company. Her producerial debut with Rebel Cat, a film called All Those Small Things, had its world premiere at the Seattle International Film Festival. It was directed by Andrew Hyatt and starred James Faulkner. She is the owner of the Actors Way Studio, a psychotherapeutic approach to actor training. Her diversity casting Zoom room set up during the pandemic was an invitation to diverse actors around the world to audition and be seen by a CSA casting director. So welcome, Nike.
Thank you.
And then we are also joined by Gretchen Wylder. Gretchen is a multidisciplinary artist and the creator, writer, actor of award-winning queer comedy series These Thems, which if you haven't, you can check it out on Outfest now. It's delightful. Gretchen has a vast theater and comedy background, having performed internationally, regionally, and in Chicago and New York City theaters for the past 15 years before recently relocating to Los Angeles. She's trained in sketch and improv at UCB and Second City and developed a successful burlesque persona competing at the Burlesque Hall of Fame in Las Vegas. Gretchen is currently writing her first novel, a supernatural hero's adventure story with a female protagonist. They are the sole owner of intersectional feminist production company Wilder Women Productions, LLC, which makes art for and in community with other marginalized people. with the intention of making the world a slightly better place through a radically loving and empathetic lens. Welcome, Gretchen.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to see both of you. Thank you for being here.
Hi, Gretchen.
I wanted to just start off by asking both of you, just to sort of like level set and get some basics out there. How do you define an inclusive set?
I was going to hand it over to you. You go.
Go ahead, Gretchen.
So sure. How do I define an inclusive set? I define an inclusive set, I guess, my focus was, if I'm going to be telling stories about a specific community, I wanted to make sure that there was a member of that community or marginalized identity represented on screen and also off screen. So it was important to me to have that equity there, so that, the people creating the work were also part of the world that was representing that work.
Yeah, for me, when I'm casting, when I'm thinking of inclusivity, or actually in any creative endeavor, I'm really looking to create a sense of balance, as opposed to having an embarrassing sense of tokenism. And so there's a sense that the world that I'm working within has a fluid sense of being well represented, not by everyone, but that it isn't a dominant, homogenized space. That's very important to me. Yeah. And I think sometimes, it also depends where, for example, in the US you're working. Sometimes it's easier to achieve that in some parts of America than in other parts. Yeah.
That's a fair point. It's a very fair point. Gretchen, I'd like to start by asking you just a very specific question around these thems. It's such a terrific example of putting inclusion and representation first. And as a member of the LGBTQ plus community myself, I know that it's often perceived as difficult to offer something that something for everyone that is included under the umbrella of our community. But you seem to have taken on that challenge as your muse, as your inspiration for this. So can you talk about a little bit of the genesis of these thems and how you set out to be so inclusive and why?
Sure. Well, the genesis of these thems started the day after Trump was elected. I was at the time in a musical. I was doing a regional production in North Carolina, and the show was very cis-het white. And, my circle of friends in New York have always been, I've always just surrounded myself with queer community and like an intersectional group of friends and loved ones and people who I like to work with. And so after Trump was elected, honestly, it just became a goal of mine to create work that represented the world that I lived in and the world that I wanted to see grow. And I thought the best way to do that was to make a piece of art that was really inclusive of a lot of different people and a lot of different perspectives. So yeah, that's kind of like the genesis of it. And then really and it's interesting because I went into it knowing I wanted it to be a really intersectional, I know that word is like thrown around a lot, but I wanted it to be a really intersectional piece. But when I wrote the show, the only character that I actually wrote as a person of color was Vero, my co-star, because I did feel like the very few examples of non-binary identities were largely white. And so that was the only stipulation that I really had in the script. And so aside from that, it was really just casting the most talented actors in the roles. And fortunately, a lot of talented actors are out there. And so I feel really lucky to have, you know, created the piece that exists now. But yeah.
Well, and we're all very grateful that you made it, because it's great.
Congratulations.
That's a nice segue in terms of, you know, you just sort of talking about your casting process. Nikkei, I'd love to get a sense from you how you see your role as a casting director, how you can use your sort of position of power in that dynamic to be to drive more inclusive casting for projects.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, I can use an example right now as a small example, a project that I'm working on, a commercial, which is calling for an extraordinary amount of diversity from this big sports company, corporate company. And there's a significant call for global diversity across the board. I mean, it's just fantastic. It's a dream sort of casting gig. And it also invites submissions from so-called real people. And my actors and I, we laugh about this, you know, what's the difference between an actor and a real person, you know? But right now in film and TV, the whole thing is, you know, there's this movement towards authenticness and real people. And as I was working with my assistant, really reaching out to communities that aren't represented, I began to realize that I actually needed to support them, because I couldn't assume that they had all the access to even be able to apply for this lucrative job, right? And so, you know, one of the things I think in terms of diversity is that when there's a call for diversity, that's great, but we need to think about how to bring those diverse communities who haven't had access. It's all about access, is it not? You know, to the various pipelines. And so, for example, I have my assistant currently working with, it's a young Black sportsman, athlete, you would say, 11, 12 emails just to support him to get into the system, so that he can submit what's going to be a brilliant tape. And so that's what I do when I'm casting, is that I hear the call for diversity, but often, and we'll get there, the structures and the institutions that call for it aren't actually able to support those communities to even get there, because it's new. It's like, oh, wait, you mean someone might not have an iPad, an iPad stand, and an iPhone, and someone who can record them, take that time out, and help them to upload to a casting website. And so I think that that's an example that's going on right now, where my studio, my assistants, we will take extra time to support diverse communities that may not have access to someone like me and the jobs I have. We'll go the extra mile to do that. And I think it's important.
It's incredibly important. It's a really good point that I think sometimes is often overlooked. I'm curious, just to continue on this, if you have any suggestions for how to approach that, either of you, really, you know, be it like set up remote casting offices on a, you know, somewhat of a regular schedule basis. Or, you know, that's just sort of off the top of my head, but I'm curious if you have any other suggestions there.
That's a good point. You know, I like to think around that, and maybe it is. Maybe I say it's going to cost more to work with this diverse person, so that I can set up a remote location so that people that are interested can just say, how do I sign up for this? How do I complete this form? What does this even mean? What does buyout and usage mean? I don't have an agent, but I am, you know, disabled, or my child is, or we've never been in this community. And so maybe that's how it is that we're setting up structures that allow access. And I'm huge on that. Who has access to just even get to the start line, never mind participate? And I think that's a really good point. That's a really good point. I'm sure I could find actors that I work with who might be interested in supporting the studio, the casting studio, in that way. It's like a hotline. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Wow, that's a wonderful idea. I hope, you know, that can be executed. And just to echo what Nike was saying about access, you know, I definitely don't have casting experience. I've been an actor for a long time, but even as an actor who's had a pretty long career at this point, it's wild, the lack of accessibility, especially being so out. And just, I mean, even the amount of ridiculous rejections I've experienced from, you know, managers and agents saying I've already pigeonholed myself and all of this, while at the same time they're calling for LGBTQ content. It's Pride Month, baby. And people are like, oh, you know, we love queer people. However, in my experience trying to move this forward, it has not, that is very different. They want a very particular viewpoint of their idea of the LGBTQ community. So it's a very hard road, and I'm still navigating that almost every day. My only addition to what Nike was saying is, from like a creator's point of view, is to just start creating your own content. And even that is like, there is privilege there also to unpack as well. Access to an iPhone, to be able to do TikToks, access to, you know, this wide net of people to help crowdfund. All of it is access and gatekeeping, and it really needs a whole infrastructure flip on the head, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of hurdles in getting the representation on screen that needs to be there.
I just want to, sorry, can I just add one more thing? I was just thinking about, how do I do that in the casting studio? And one of the things, I've been on screen, I remember, you know, the very first time, and just thinking, oh my God, I'm eyes and teeth, and always going on set as a Black actor, looking for the DP and asking, have you ever lit a Black, when I had the courage to do this, saying, have you ever lit a Black person? Because the lighting was so awful, all you saw were the whites of my eyes and my teeth. And so one of the things that I do with my assistants is, you know, when a person of color comes in, I say, we're going to make a fuss. We're going to make a fuss about altering the lighting to reflect them, because the camera was not built for dark skins. The camera was built for a Western context. And so even though I know very little about lighting, we will all stop and make a fuss just to acknowledge that there is a different skin tone in the room. And in that way, we create expectations for that actor moving forward, but also the team understand that, yeah, the lighting, things need to change to support the work of, at a minimum, actors of color, but all forms of diversity, diverse communities. Yeah.
Absolutely. You're bringing up a good point in terms of the conversation that as the sort of like, especially if you are the head of a production, if you're the creator, the director, at what point do you start talking to your cast and crew about inclusive practices, such as you know, discussing the lighting, or if, you know, just as one example, there's so many, and what kind, how do you set the bar for what kind of inclusive culture you'd like to have on set?
Well, as far as these thems goes, that started, the reason why our crew was so inclusive and diverse is fully because of my amazing producer. So I have to give them a shout out. Sophia Clark is an incredibly talented producer, also a Black non-binary femme, and brought on like a dream crew who, you know, it was, and I feel like that These Thems was a very rare experience from what I've heard from other people's experiences on sets like that. But it was very much a priority to everybody that people felt respected, seen, you know, and pronouns were asked, you know, consistently throughout if people needed reminders or whatnot. And I think really it starts with the person who's going, like, as far as These Thems goes, it was who am I going to choose as the core creatives and make sure that their morals are in alignment with the production and make sure that trickles down to everyone who we cast and everyone who we hire. So that was a priority for me, for our producer as well as our director. I wanted to make sure that there was I had hired a trans masculine director because half of our cast is trans identified. And so that was really important to me. And same with, you know, making sure our DP and our gaffer and people just had, came from different backgrounds and intuitively knew, you know, things exactly like what Nikkei was saying. And yeah, it is important. And also I do think it's interesting because before I met Sophia, I had a different producer on board, and she's very capable, and she ended up being a consulting producer, but she is a white straight woman, and she wanted to bring on like, you know, all these white dudes who were gonna do a great job, who had all this training, had, you know, she was like, this director has worked on Broad City, he can get it in front of Alana and, you know, yada, yada, yada. And I was just like, that sounds great. And I'm sure they're really talented, but I know for a fact there are people who haven't had the opportunities that would be just as talented. And so I think a lot of it is just taking a chance and being really, really stubborn about who you're choosing to give these opportunities to. So yeah. Also, I will say, I want to give a shout out to Disclosure documentary. If people haven't watched it, it's really a great, it's an incredible documentary all about trans representation in media. And Sam Feder, the director, when he was working on it, made sure that all of the crew were trans identified. And if they could not find a trans identified crew member, then they made sure to hire a cis crew member, but then had someone who was trans identified shadow that crew, so to train them, which is really, really, really cool. So, you know, situations like that, just trying to cast a wide net. And if you can't find someone that reflects the stories you want to tell, you know, still thinking, how can I uplift? How can I like bring more people into this world? Yeah.
Absolutely. That's such a, it sort of goes to the point about access that we were talking about earlier, is in terms of when you are casting or finding crew and you're looking for experience, oftentimes underrepresented folks do not have that experience. And but yet you if you have the opportunity to provide that learning experience, that is only going to set everybody else up for success down the road by allowing that learning opportunity. I think both of you, Nikkei, you had specifically mentioned this idea of sort of avoiding tokenism, and especially sort of like related to casting, and like if you're getting casting notices that are looking for, quote, real people, but then Gretchen, you mentioned like there oftentimes is a very specific version of that person that they're looking for, which is oftentimes a sort of tokenized version of what they're looking for. How do you navigate that? And I think this is sort of probably a different question for both of you. It's like, as a casting director, how do you navigate casting, sort of filling that brief, but avoiding tokenism. As a creator, if you are not part of a community that you are representing on screen, how do you, what steps do you take to make sure that you're creating a safe space and an authentic space for that cast?
I love what you're doing, by the way, Gretchen. I listened to that with real interest, just how you bring people into your process. Anyway. And to answer your question, Clay, I felt my stomach sort of knot up because it's an ongoing battle. I mean, and there are days when I'm tired because I'm working within a very conventional infrastructure that is eons old. And as a Black woman, there is a sense where, and it's been a while now, but it has taken a while to get here to even be heard in certain ways. And so it's an ongoing process. And I work in the commercial sector in terms of the films, the budget levels of $1 million and above, in terms of, say, narrative features and TV and commercials. And that world is shot through with the phrase that Gretchen used, this het, and I don't know what the other one was, but and so, you sort of, you come into that and think, where do I even begin? And it's baby steps if you want to last the journey, and it's consistency of messaging from over here. And it's trying not to over martyrize this space and, this space also being at danger of being mangled in the infrastructure in which you're trying to create a difference. I mean, that crossroads of intersectionality can get very blocked. That intersection can get very packed. And in those moments, because I'm used to being, say, usually the first or the only, so many of us are with, when we sort of make it in some way, it can be challenging. And one of the things I'm saying at the moment, I'm trying to remind my producers as I come across them, suddenly there's a furious call for an intense need for trans actors or members of the LGBTQ or women or actors of color, but they've got to be experienced, and I have to show an awful lot of grace and focus as I say, well, under the circumstances, we haven't encouraged trans actors to, whatever it is, be in drama. We haven't even recognized their possibilities as creatives. How can you expect an experienced fill in the blank, and so we have to take risk. And so it becomes a thing of both educating, showing patience, going out to the community, asking for trust in that community, going back in to the, dominant culture, having the conversation. And so there's a lot of movement back and forth at all those intersections.
Yeah.
It's a journey, it's a process.
Definitely.
And from a creator perspective, yeah, Gretchen, go ahead.
Yeah, from a creator perspective, it's a very fine line. It's really a fine line that you're treading. And I think, the biggest advice I would have to steer clear of tokenizing is, one, again, to surround yourself with the people that you're representing. Also, during the creative process, it was really important to me to make sure that my actors felt really safe to express whatever they needed to express, and that they, that they felt like what what the lines, how the lines had been written were, true to their experience. So that was really important. And also, I think as far as a creative goes, I do think that there is a mindset of staying in your own lane in a certain way as well. And I mean, even so, like, I was the sole writer for season 1 of These Thems. And for the most part, the reception has been wonderful. Of course, there have been a few people that have accused me of tokenizing. And to that, it's just a matter of like humbling yourself and being like, crap, I like missed the mark in your eyes, and I'm sorry about that. And just like what you can do better. So like, for example, like season 2, I now have 2 co-writers that are of the trans experience. And so I'm, first of all, thrilled about that, but also just making like, instead of approaching something from either a place of lack, trying to bring in more people, again, that are representative of that experience. And also, I do think it is interesting because I do think there is this new wave of like, a lot of people are like, ooh, I'm going to throw in a trans storyline, or I'm going to throw in, a Black storyline as a white creator or whatnot. And, I do think that there does need to be some sort of checking yourself as a creator and being like, why am I doing this because I know it's trendy? Or am I doing this because it's really a part of the story that needs to be told? Or like, what actually is the purpose? So yeah, I would say all of that.
There's a lot to unpack here. There's
a lot to unpack. It really, yeah. And and even so, it's interesting because also I think the issue, at least for the queer community, is that there is so little representation. Really, like people are like, there's a gay character everywhere, and it's like, you don't understand. This is, our world is very different from, what we see on mainstream media. And so I think that people are, when they see something, especially like These Thems, they're like, people do get upset when they're like, there isn't any, ace representation, there isn't any, or, there's little sprinklings here and there. And I think it is important to be like, okay, I don't have to represent everyone. That's not my job. What story am I trying to tell? Let's focus on these characters. And as, specifically as this series, as it expands, making room for other storylines to come in. But it's no person's job to represent everybody. It's literally impossible. So again, just like making sure you are surrounding yourself with people whose experience you want to, highlight. Yeah.
That's a really great point. This sort of like segues into prior to the start of the session here, Shay, our events coordinator, was filling me in on some back and forth emails that they had with Nikkei around sort of the complexities and nuances of casting underrepresented people. And sort of one of the examples was, there's a strong calling in the trans community right now that only trans actors should play trans roles. And, similarly, there's that sort of extends to all kinds of different representation. One of the other examples is that only Chinese actors should play Chinese roles, et cetera. And from some actors' perspective, they can find that quite limiting. So there's sort of like two sides of the coin there. I wonder if both of you can speak to that complexity of nuance around casting and like how, I guess what both of your approaches would be.
Yeah, I'm an actor. I'm an actor by training, a theatre actor. And when I came to America, I didn't identify as a Black actor because in Europe, I'd just been an actor. And so it was really strange and really disconcerting when I would get calls or invitations to audition, and particularly when I started moving over to some screen stuff as an actor, when I would be invited to do things for African American actors, and I said, but I'm from England, I'm not African American, and I remember having this discussion with my agent, who was sort of shocked and said, but, and then he was confused. It's like, well, if you're not African American, you know, so I personally just identify as an actor first, and don't have a sense of those boundaries for myself as an actor. It becomes very different, I think, in casting for film in the mainstream, when everything is broken down in terms of a demographic. And in terms of age, race, gender, I mean, it's just a complete demographic breakdown before you even get to the psyche or the soul of the story you're trying to tell, which is curious to me. And one of the things I do very easily is, because I see in that way, is just consider, well, what if it's a woman playing this role? I mean, just very simply blurring and making fluid as much as possible, because I can see the potential of the story because of my own reality and the communities that I've been in. And I would like to think that all roles are accessible to all people. I know that's an idealized thing, but then I think I was saying, when we were talking, I was saying to them, to Shay, you know, that major conversation with Samuel L. Jackson, who didn't think that Black British actors should play African American roles. I mean, that's specific. So he didn't think that Daniel Kaluuya should have played that role in Get Out, because the nature of interracial relationships in Europe, in England, is different from the nature of the same here. And so he was saying, no, it must be absolutely identified in terms of history and experience. Kaluuya doesn't come from that. I mean, as an English actor, he comes from a whole different world, which is he's an actor, and that's his job. And whether he was trans or gay or Black, or his job is to be an actor.
Wow, that's interesting. I am not aware of that conversation. You said Denzel Washington said that?
No, Samuel L. Jackson.
Okay, my bad.
Yeah, no, that's okay.
Okay.
And it was actually a conversation in the New Yorker as well. I was sharing this with my actors in studio a couple of weeks ago, because I presented these, you know, we've got to talk about this stuff. And so we talk about it, you know, within the acting, within my studio. And it's in the New Yorker. 2017, that conversation came up. But it also came up when I was on set with him, with Samuel L. Jackson, about this little fraught thing between, you know, Black actors within the Black community as well.
That's interesting. I mean, I can only speak to the queer community, and, you know, I do think I honestly feel like the real issue here is that just there's not enough diverse stories being told. I think if there were more opportunities, and if there was more money behind diverse stories, if there was more support, then I think this issue would be solved like that. But I'm actually very passionate about queer actors playing queer roles. Specifically because, just as my personal experience as a lesbian identified actor who has been told by so many people, so many casting directors, that I don't look like I'm gay, you know, or what does it look like to be gay? What does this do? And, you know, as lovely as Kate Winslet is in Ammonite, you know, it's just really difficult when you're being told you pigeonhole yourself. You're never going to be able to be cast as, a straight character again. But then they also don't want to see you for queer roles. I think at some point the pendulum will shift again, and then maybe it'll be, there will be more ability for like nuance or whatnot. But until queer people are given the opportunity to play the queer roles, I think that's something I'm really passionate about. And that's even more important right now, specifically with the trans community. Another good reason to watch Disclosure, because they talk in depth about the harm that has been caused by cis actors playing trans roles. So that's a great resource. But yeah, as far as I'm concerned, same with like, the disabled community or the neurodivergent community, it really is hard. It's like, if you're being told you've pigeonholed yourself, but then you're still not given those opportunities, then you're just out of the system all of a sudden. So
that's thank you, Gretchen. Yes, because I'm suddenly thinking about, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I had a thought, and it was, yeah, but what I do is I queer the casting space. So when and I use that to mean that I'm critiquing my own casting process, but actually when those roles, say within the LGBTQ community, obviously, well, I say obviously, but also for disabled roles very rarely come up, I don't open them up to people outside of that community. I absolutely seek to find direct representation from within that community. Yeah, I just wanted to make that clear, because of the lack of roles, availability, and access. And I think that's important. And I think it's important that those communities do have an opportunity to speak their stories from a place of deep authenticity. I think it does become more complicated for me, and I haven't worked all this out, when it becomes, can a Black actor from Italy or France play the role of a Black character that's in America, or, then I think, my brain becomes fried a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. I think it also, something, certainly in the indie space, nobody's making any money. All right. We have yet to find the way to make money. However, when it comes to bigger projects or commercials or mainstream movies or something like that, you do have to think, who's getting paid for this, So then it's like, Kate Winslet got a lot of money to play a lesbian when and she's profiting off of that marginalized community. So it's very layered. And same with, like, if there's an Italian Black actor telling a story that's a very, focused on the Black American experience, it's like, and I don't have an answer for that, but it is, you do have to think about, like, it all goes back to, opportunities and people, yeah.
We're getting a lot of having a really robust conversation in the comments, which I'm only like catching a little bit of, because I'm paying attention to you folks, but I want to make sure that I'm gonna represent some of these folks that are joining us today. So if you're in the audience and you have specific questions for our panelists, please feel free to start throwing those in the chat. We'll get to some of those. Just to sort of, before we get to some audience questions, bring it back to some real practical advice that our viewers in the creator community can take away. Are there even just small adjustments that you can make in the casting process or on set to make an actor feel more comfortable, more safe? Are there specific conversations that You have with the production heads that foster that sort of openness and safety. Anything that you would have learned through your experience that you can offer these creators watching?
I think for me, it happens in the studio more than on set. I don't always spend a lot of time on set, but certainly as a casting director, I think it's incumbent upon me to always say and to always ask if any of these roles can be read by members of diverse communities. I mean, it's a given. It's just a given, however big that role might be. And so that's the question to leadership, really, to those in power.
Right.
And then I think the other thing is when actors are in the studio, seeing them, hearing them, wanting to know about pronouns, not being afraid to just go into a conversation about their community, their life, not being afraid. I'm never afraid to ask questions, to be curious, and to really get curious about that, wanting an authentic connection with them.
That's really lovely. I mean, yes. Gretchen.
Also, yes. Yeah, little things that we did were on the call sheets, we included people's pronouns. So that was a very easy, straightforward situation. Also, we made sure that at the beginning of set days, we would like all circle up or have some sort of emotional check-in, just make sure we're doing okay. Also, because our core creative team did kind of represent different identities that were, reflected in the cast and crew, we made sure that people knew that this was a safe space, that they didn't have to necessarily talk to me as the creator or Sophie as the producer or Jet as the director. You could go to anybody if you felt uncomfortable at any point. If any uncomfortable feelings came up, those would be addressed. So I think just, making sure that people are feeling, what Nike was saying, like feeling seen and respected, and especially in this industry, I feel like respect is not a priority for a lot of people, unfortunately. So yeah, just making sure that people have a safe place to go to or someone to talk to if they do have an issue.
Sure. I want to just follow up on a piece of that, which is that I feel like, this has sort of always existed, but from the various festivals that I've been watching for the last couple of years, there's been, I would say, an increasing content that is specifically driving at conflict around identity. Between characters that, let's say you're depicting a racist character interacting with somebody of color, or something in that regard. So obviously, there's an important story being told there. But how do you handle that on set with the actors? Because as we know, some actors can get very emotionally drawn into a character and into a scene, and especially when something that heavy is being addressed. What are some tactics to make sure that everyone still feels safe even when you're tackling tough subjects in that way?
That's a great question, and it's the same thing with violence against women. What happens?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
and you're a woman writing it. I think it's. Now the unions, and I think just generally, there are coaches on set for that reason. I sometimes work as an on-set coach, really preparing the body and the mind and the being to enact and or receive these moments of whatever they might be. And I think that's critical. I think it's critical as a way of the actor taking care of themselves, the instrument, because they are channels. We are channels that will open up and move information and story through us. And I think that I don't know that I can say go here, go there, or speak to that person. But what I can say is be conscious, be present, and ask for the help, the assistance to work on this scene, to know who the other person is that you're going to be working opposite, and to be okay about saying, I think I might need help and I'd like to work with the actor or at least see them, just to make sure that we're on the same page as we risk ourselves in this process. Not just the person receiving, but possibly even the person enacting whatever it is. So ask, speak up, be aware. Don't martyr yourself for the work. Don't hurt yourself or harm yourself or risk being harmed because you think, I'm just grateful I got the job. You know, I don't want to be a problem. I'll just get on with it, which is a tendency if we're from minority, underrepresented communities to just be grateful and get on with it. No, don't do that.
100%, absolutely. And, you know, bouncing off of that, one of the first things that came to my mind was intimacy coordinator. You know, now there are jobs that are specifically made for people to come on set and be a buffer. And even just as an actor, making sure your boundaries are keeping you healthy and sane. What I can speak to in the process of these thems was, so there is a storyline where there is some transphobia that happens within a relationship dynamic. And, you know, it was intentionally written in because there is transphobia still within the LGBTQ community. And so I wanted to highlight that. And that scene was really intense to film. It's between a white cis gay man and a trans man of color. And it's when our trans character, oh, that's my cat, sorry. It's when our trans actor is coming out to this guy that he's been on a few dates with. And the cis character reacts really poorly. And it just took a lot of preparation. We made sure that, you know, a lot of times on set, you'll like have your sides and you'll show up and go. And that was one thing that we knew would be a sensitive like scene, a sensitive topic. So we did a ton of prep work. Our director, Jet Garrison, is awesome and really took a lot of time, talked to Sean, our trans actor, separately, talked to Nick, our cis actor, separately, made sure, like, are there any questions? How do you feel? And then combine them in a like pretty thorough rehearsal process before we even stepped on set, so that they felt, you know, safe and good. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah. We're running out of time, but I do want to get at least one or two questions in here. Let's see. Olivia Grace, question for Nikkei. How frequently do you experience colorism when working with clients? Are you able to encourage them to consider darker actors, especially women, or have you faced a lot of pushback?
Good question. Yeah, colorism. It's interesting, you know, the pushback is so subtle. You've got to be good at reading a lot of code. You know, there's a lot that's going on. I always, first of all, I love seeing darker skinned women, men, actors, you know, to be read, to be for audition. And I do. What I don't do is I don't make a case for, but I present, because that's my job, is to present actors. And yes, there is always pushback, but it's very subtle. And you've got to be careful because you can get paranoid. It's like, well, are they pushing back about that because it's unspoken, or are they pushing back about something else? And so, as I said before, though, I'm very committed to opening up the space and allowing diversities, multiple diversities into the casting space. I think I probably experience colorism, racism more than I care to focus on, because if I focused on it all the time, I don't think I'd get out of bed. I think I tend to look towards what I can achieve and what I will achieve rather than what's holding me back and problematic, because I have to. So I focus on the goal. And of course, I always, as I said, I think before, have my actors even recognize that they might be excluding a particular skin tone because it might be, I mean, they wouldn't even recognize, these producers wouldn't even know, you know what I mean? And so, yeah, I am working at that front all the time. Thank you for the question, Olivia Grace.
I want to be conscious of both of your time. You've been so generous to join us today and offer such great insights. I want to give you an opportunity to say any last little bit of advice that you'd like to, though.
Gretchen.
Oh gosh. Advice. I would just say, when creating something, you know, my biggest lesson that I've learned is not ever approaching anything from a place of lack. Always, you know, bringing on as many different viewpoints, as many different eyes as you can. Really trying to uplift people. Yeah, as that's, I guess that's my little nugget there, you know, especially when dealing with like a large project. It is about, you know, making sure many different people have the opportunity there. Yeah.
Yeah. That's great. Nikkei, anything?
Yeah, I really do. I keep coming back in my mind to Gretchen's idea about being in the community, being a part of the community, not necessarily that you want to work with creatively, but in order to feel safe, you know, surrounding yourself in the community that helps you to see who you are and that sees you, I think does so much, because I think sometimes we can feel so isolated and alone, and you know, the impact on our mental health can be utterly crushing, which then impacts our confidence as creators. And I experience that. And I often think, gosh, if I could just be in my whatever community it is, just to be, because I know space can be held within that community. There's an innate understanding, and I'm not alone on the journey. And I think that's important. I think doing the work to be in empathetic, identifying community, and a community that identifies with you, is crucial. And finding mentors perhaps, but community first.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Can I bounce off of that real quick?
Yeah,
sure.
I also love what you said, and specifically about taking up space, because I do feel like, you know, there are just anyone who is brave enough to create their own work in any capacity, you know, whether that be through casting, the casting lens, whether that be an actor, whether that be a creator or writer, it's now is the time to take up that space and to kind of like shoo that imposter syndrome. You know, even though I am cis and white, I oftentimes ask myself, would I be this nervous if I were a straight white man? Probably not. I'll go ahead and move forward. And asking for support, I think, is really powerful, actually. Yeah. And can I do one little shout out real quick?
Yeah.
Speaking of asking for support.
I love it.
If y'all do want to watch These Dems, it's streaming for free this month on Outfest Now. And we also are doing it's a very big long shot, but we are eligible for Emmy nominations right now. So if you watch it and you love it, please consider voting if you're in the Academy, or letting people know. We're eligible for short form digital series, best actor, and then best actress as well. So
amazing.
That's brilliant. Congratulations.
Definitely, even if you're not a voting member of the TV Academy, just share it loud and wide to everyone, so we can get some viewership there.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thanks for
thank you
for this
both
conversation.
so much. Yeah.
Thank you.
No, it's been absolutely a treat, and I'm sure we could have gone on for another 2 hours. There's so much more to get to here, but thank you so much for the time.
Are we off air now? Yes, I'm assuming.
Oh.